Welcome, everybody, to our CEU titled Acoustic Planning for Commercial Spaces. A couple of housekeeping items, and we'll get this thing rolling. Because we've got this set up on webinar, if you have a question, please enter them into the chat. And Lisa Bond, who's our marketing guru, will be answering those, and those that she feels that she wants to push to the end, we'll have a question and answer session then. All right. At the end of this presentation, I'll share a slide with you on how to get credit for it. For this presentation, there's some steps that we all can go through. Hopefully, everybody has seen my title slide. It gives the course number and also the unit credit, which is an hour. This has all been approved and sanctioned by IDCEC for you IIDA members. We're also working on getting final approval from AIA, and we should have that very quickly. So let's get rolling here this morning. Here are kind of the steps that we'll be walking through. We'll talk about building knowledge. I want to give everybody a layman's understanding of what sound is, what acoustics are. We'll talk about some practical applications in our world, the furniture and interior planning. And then lastly, and most importantly, we're going to talk about crafting solutions. All this knowledge without being able to apply it really is useless. And so we're going to spend a fair bit of time on crafting some solutions that you're all comfortable with. IDCEC requires I put a couple of slides up to talk about their involvement and their endorsement of this program. Like I said, they've gone through and edited our slides and vetted them. And here's a couple of kind of paid political announcements, if you will, for IDCEC for all of us. All right, well, let's get going. One of the important things that they require, IDCEC, in other words, is that we list some of our information sources. And these are just some of them. We'll be referring to them a little bit more. We'll talk extensively about some of the well building contributions. And you should recognize the rest of them, the DoD, the European Acoustics Association, the American Acoustics Association, and one that you may not be familiar with, Infocom, which is the International Audiovisual or AV Association. And I spent a little bit of time in that world. Let me give you just a Reader's Digest version of my background so that you can kind of judge credibility. I've been involved in the commercial furniture business since '85 when I went to work for Steelcase Corporate. Did that for about 6 or 7 years, then rolled over into the dealer side of the world. Ran a Steelcase dealership here in Seattle, where I still am based. Started an all-steel dealer from scratch. And then in the great recession of 08, 09, I made a jump into commercial audio visual and did some very large projects, Microsoft, Amazon, Stanford Med, those type of things. Did that until I realized those people are not normal, and started a rep group and handled the Pacific Northwest, including Alaska and Hawaii. But it was during my tenure in the audiovisual that I really learned the importance of acoustics. You would hang all this gear, and if the acoustics in the space wasn't right, you would sound like you were talking to the dark side of the moon. So I'm going to use about almost 40 years worth of experience plus contributions from these folks to kind of develop this presentation. All right, so let's get started. Setting the stage, a lot of annually, there were workplace studies. This one I drew from PC or pre-COVID. It was a Gensler workplace study. And they indicated that the number one issue that people had in open office plans were sound, the exposure to nearby conversations, etc. And although this was done a while ago, I think this is still relevant. About 50% of people make a hiring decision based on their perception of what an office looks like and sounds like. Today is no exception on how hard it is to attract and retain really good people. So I thought this was an important nugget for us. A more recent study done by HOK Target basically comes up with the same conclusions, that whether we're men or women, 65 to 67% of people say that sound is the number one issue in today's offices. And again, people that are really, what are we hypersensitive to, whether it be the temperature or people close, adjacencies, acoustics continues to be the #1 issue in the open plan. This was interesting, and I pulled this out from earlier this year. This was the ABI, which is the Architectural Building Index, and this is a crystal ball of how leadership and architectural firms, A&D firms, see where their billing's coming from. What are they going to be doing? And it's interesting to note that over half of them are coming from two basic categories. And I've listed those so that we can better understand what they're referring to. Adaptive reuse is basically reconfiguring existing client spaces to help with this whole return to office initiative that we've all been struggling with this year. And the other interesting part is this basic interior modernization, and it includes upgrading the Wi-Fi and some of the equipment, but addressing acoustics. So I thought this was important from an architectural and design firm standpoint, that as they looked into this year, they saw half their funds being, or half their billing being generated from these two categories. And I just listened in on the Q4 of BIFMA, and they basically are saying that these two categories are going to remain generating the majority of fees going into next year. So part of the challenge that we have are, y'all have created some magnificently gorgeous offices. And here are some examples of them. A lot of glass, ceilings have been opened up, carpets have been eliminated. The challenge that we have is that a lot of the soft surfaces where sound used to go and die aren't prevalent anymore. So what we need to do is figure out how we can reintroduce soft surfaces and blocking materials to eliminate and manage some of the sound. So minimalism is loud. It's pretty, but the challenge is keeping it from being an echo chamber. It's interesting also to note that Well Building has dedicated over 7 of their chapters in all of their modules addressing sound. We all like to know some reference points, and here's a good one. There are 2 other international standards organizations out there, ASTM and ISO. We know ISO mostly for its manufacturing standards, but they also have dedicated chapters to sound. As we get into this, we'll see that they have created standards for reverb or echo on virtually every interior space known to man. And we're going to reference that here in just a little bit. All right, so let's start to move into understanding what sound is. And I love this slide. I've been wanting to use this slide for a very long time. And then I realized it came from 1980. And for some of you younger folks out there, you're going to have to look up what the heck recording tape is. For those of us with gray hair, we know what that is. So let's get into understanding what sound really is. And sound basically is just energy. It's molecules at rest until their buddy next to them has an energy, a buzz, and they bounce into each other. Our buddy Al, who's now running a successful chain of bagel stores, kind of came up with this theory many years ago, in the 30s actually, that energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only change from one form to another. Interesting side note. I was on a plane this week when I watched Oppenheimer, and Uncle Al here plays an important part of that whole thing. But anyway, it's an important part of physics that we all got exposed to back in high school, and this is going to come back to play here in just a little bit when we start to try to manage sound. The important thing to know here is that we're not trying to create silence. This happens to be an anechoic chamber, soundproof booth, if you will. It's just up the road from me here in Redmond in the Seattle area. And basically, this is where sounds go to die. If you ever get an opportunity to take a visit to one of these, don't let them lock you in. I had the opportunity to do that once. There were about a dozen of us. They made us sit on the floor. They turned the lights off and closed the door. And in about 30 seconds, a couple of us lost our cookies. So anyway, a fun side note, just to say that the goal is not silence. If you ever want to experience total silence and devoid of senses, talk somebody into taking to an anechoic chamber. Also, notice the triangular shapes on the wall. We're going to come back and talk about this here in just a second. Our goal is not silence when we talk about managing acoustics. Whenever we're dealing with sound, there are 3 primary components in our world that we need to be aware of. There are many more, but there are primarily these three that we are going to be concerned with. The first is volume, basically how loud or how quiet it is. We measure that in decibels, and it's also a measure of how much energy is in that sound. Obviously, something that is very loud has more energy than something that's very soft. Pitch, whether something is very low or something is very high, has to do, and we measure that in frequencies. It also lets us know how hard or easy it is to manage that sound energy. We probably all experienced an outdoor concert miles away from us, and you can still hear the low rumblings of either the bass or the drums. It's because the low frequency sound waves are much harder to capture and manage than the very high ones are because of the energy associated with them. And lastly is speed. Sound travels rather quickly, particularly through air, which is what we're primarily going to be concerned about. And as a result, that energy translates into echo, and we're going to unpackage that here in just a minute. But volume, pitch, and speed all play an important part as we talk about managing acoustics in interior environments. Now, let's go back, and hopefully this is a refresher for most of you. For some of you, this may be something brand new, and I'll try to demystify this. NRC, noise reduction coefficient, is a measure of how well does something absorb sound energy. And it's on a scale of 0 to 1.0. And again, it's the measure of how well does something absorb. Yeah, but Darrell, I've seen some things with a 1.2 or a 1.4 rating. Yep, that's called marketing. The scale only goes to 1.0. I'll explain here in a second how they get to there and how we get to NRC. But the first one is NRC. It's a noise reduction. How well does something absorb sound? The other one is the STC, sound transmission class or coefficient. It's been called both things. And it's a measure of how well does something block sound? How well does something block sound? And that scale goes from 0 to 70. Now, another, aside, wouldn't it have been great if the pinhead scientists who were creating these scales came up with a common one? 1 to 10, 1 to 100, whatever. But they're not. So again, NRC from 0 to 1.0, STC from 0 to 70. It's going to be rare we see something over 60, but the scale does go up to 70. Now, there's a couple of other scales or measurements that are out there. They're not being used very much, hardly at all anymore. The ceiling attenuation class, or CAC, that basically was rating how effective drop ceilings were, ACT, acoustic ceiling tiles. We've pretty much gone back into the NRC ratings for those. The SPL is a very sophisticated measure of ambient noise, and we use that in white noise. We'll talk about that in a second. And the last is NIC, which almost was never used, but has been brought back to popularity by some of the folks doing mobile modular walls like the Dirts and the Falks and those type of things. I just didn't want you to be ambushed or be aware of something but not know what they were. The primary ones now in the industry are NRC and STC. I told you I would explain how somebody got a 1.3 or a 1.4 rating on their NRC. NRC is basically the average of measuring a material's absorptive properties at 4 frequency ranges: 500 hertz, 1,000, 1,500, and 2,000. And the reason that those 4 are selected is basically that's where the human voice lies. Now, some people will test their product on the 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 hertz range. Those are dog whistle type ranges. And they attribute their ability to manage or absorb sound at those ranges to a higher rating on the score. But the scale, again, only goes to 1.0, and it's of the human voice patterns that get those earnings. All right, hope I didn't confuse you too bad there. When sound interacts with a barrier, it's going to do one of these 3.5 things. It's either going to go through it, all or some of it, think screen door. It's going to be absorbed by that barrier, think screaming into your pillow. It's going to be reflected away, think those angled partitions or a cement wall, if you will. And the half would be this diffusion. It's also going to be reflected away, but we're going to use shapes, mostly angled shapes, to reflect that sound back to a place other than its origin. Think stealth fighter skins, right? It reflects that radar energy away from its source. So as a result, it looks like a flock of seagulls is flying by instead of your life about to disappear from a B-1 bomber. So again, it either goes through, it's absorbed by, or it's reflected off. Now, energy, pitch, and speed all play a part on how well something like this operates. Now, I'll give you an example. If something is very loud, it has a high bit of energy, and it has a high pitch, the chances of that transmissioning, that going through, transiting a barrier is much higher than if it's very quiet and perhaps, kind of moderate. So energy, pitch, and speed play a part of how sound interacts with barriers. For the purpose of this conversation this morning, we're really going to be talking about two aspects of sound. Sound coming from another space into our space. Think an airplane flying overhead, or you've got an office near a train track. That would be, or private office conversations, or a big conference room, and you can hear what's going on out in the hallway. That is sound transitioning from one space to another. Versus sound within the space. You're in a very large conference room, hard walls and glass, and you get a high level of echo. So those are the two aspects of sound that we're going to be talking about mostly here going forward. When we talk about sound issues, now we start to put our hat on to look to manage them. This is typically where I break out in the Jackson 5's rendition of ABC. Remember that song? We're going to use this mnemonic device, ABC, absorbing, blocking, covering, to look at how we can start to manage sound. And this will come back and play an important part of our crafting solutions down the road here in just a little bit. So again, think of the ABC song and come up with absorbing, blocking, and covering. Now, since I'm a product of public school, I'll start with B, and we'll talk first about blocking. This is, again, going back to using the STC measure. This is the ability to prevent sound from migrating from one space to another. Now, it's interesting. It's one of the more popular calls that I get. Hi, we've got this big, beautiful boardroom, and everybody sitting in the lobby can hear what's going on. Not cool at all, and that really has to do with creating barriers. There are a lot of ways to start to prevent that from happening. In other words, sound migrating from one space to another. And it goes either through walls, it'll go through drop ceilings, up above in the cold air return. There's a lot of different ways it can happen. Now, as designers sitting in this audience, the biggest thing I can ask you to do is when you create your construction documents for the build out, please hold the general contractors or whoever is doing that work accountable for their work. Now, oftentimes what will happen is we'll use very thin drywall, we use metal studs, we won't put in any sound blocks over the cold air returns in the ceiling if there is a drop ceiling. If you've taken that into account in your construction drawings, please hold whoever is building the place out to that level. Now, I'll pull this from the DoD, the Department of Defense. They get pretty persnickety about soundproof areas. And if you're going to be involved with working with them and you hear the term SCIF, which is a secure compartmentalized information facility, I love these acronyms, right? It's basically a soundproof conference room. Here are some of the methodologies that they recommend, right? Offset studs, multiple layers of drywall, insulated walls. In other words, there are some standards and some guidance out there for those of you that do have this challenge of providing some secure spaces for your corporate clients as well as some of the government. But again, when we're blocking sound, that really is a before occupancy challenge, not an after occupancy one. And there are some specific methodologies that you can employ to make sure that you get there. Sound covering or sound masking, we're basically using sound to raising the background ambient noise to the part where we're disguising individual word audibility. So in other words, instead of hearing a specific conversation, you're hearing more of the Charlie Brown teacher's wah, 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 wah. And the way that we do this is that we're setting up a series of emitters. The industry calls them emitters, not speakers, but you and I can call them that, around the space. And typically there's zoned and there's volume stats or rheostats around the space. And what we're trying to do, and it sounds like hiss, it sounds like the HVAC, like sound rushing, because our ears are accustomed to associating that broadcast static as HVAC. Now, I was working for Steelcase back in their corporate headquarters when they opened it in '85. And about 2 or 3 months in, they had a white noise system. It broke down. It stopped working. And everybody in, middle of Michigan in the summer went, oh my God, it's getting hot in here. I got to go home. Temperature hadn't changed a single degree. But again, we associate that rushing air sound with HVAC. Now, I love our industry, and we create terms. One of the ones that has been popular for quite a while is pink noise. Let me explain what pink noise is. Basically, instead of using these little canny emitters, we're actually using speakers. And they have the fidelity range now to broadcast music or paging, mass notification. And we had a very large, so we can broadcast other things than just static. They broadcast static in addition to music. I'll give you an example. We did a very large engineering firm up here in the Pacific Northwest, a couple hundred engineers in a wide open space, and we hung a pink noise system. Well, the facilities manager was kind of an earth mom, and the first thing that she did was broadcast babbling brook sounds. So I called her and checked in on her, and she goes, oh, we had a situation. Oh, what was the situation? She said, well, we had very long lineups at the bathroom because we were broadcasting running water sounds all day long. So they modified that, and the engineers got a hold of it. Then it became a battle of the bands between Lawrence Welk and Metallica. We basically had to decommission the whole thing. But just so that you know, pink noise is using speakers, normal speakers, throughout the facility to broadcast in addition to static sound. Now, there's also a new term recently launched called brown noise. Brown noise basically is introducing urban sounds, horns honking, sirens going off, dogs barking into an environment. Don't know whether I'd want to go that far in a commercial space. And the other one that's interesting, just launched, is green sound, green noise. That helps induce sleep. Again, probably not appropriate in commercial spaces, but hey, you heard these terms here first. All right. So basically, white noise is introducing static into a workspace to raise the background ambient sound so that individual conversations or words aren't distinguishable. We've all been in commercial spaces after hours or maybe even on the weekend when the HVAC isn't running and it gets really spooky, right? That's exactly what we're trying to defeat with white noise. All right. So let's talk about echo. Well Building says that the single most important factor in interior acoustic comfort is the elimination of reverb. It's a fancy word for saying echo. The other interesting thing that I want everybody to get comfortable with saying is this term buried in the middle of this paragraph, acoustic comfort. Say it to yourself, acoustic comfort. That's the buzzword that's going on out there when we talk about the elimination of echo or sound migrating from one space to the other. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that there's a number of these international standard organizations that have set standards for everything. Tolerances on a car door, quality of food. And they've got it for echo. And the way that we measure echo is we do it in reverb time or reverberation time, or the wonks love acronyms. We call it RT for reverb time. And they measure this in seconds, fractions of a second. And so private offices have a RT, gymnasiums have an RT, football stadiums have an RT, restaurants have an RT. So there are standards that are available to you out there. Well Building, ASTM, and ISO all list them in their interior reverb times. Let's get a better understanding of what echo really is. And what echo basically is hearing the same sound from multiple sources. You're hearing my voice, in this case, from a mechanical speaker someplace on your computer or on a wall. And that's being reflected by this green line. We call it direct sound. And that's hitting your ears first. But you're also hearing my voice bouncing off of walls, tabletops, other people's ceilings, glass windows. And I'm trying to show that in the blue and the red lines. And you'll notice that as the red lines bounce, they start to get a little thinner. And what I'm trying to show there is that every bounce, every interaction absorbs a little bit of energy. And these sounds reach your ear nanoseconds later, depending whether you're standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon or in a large conference room. And those all impact you as echo. We're hearing the same sound at different volume levels at different times. Those big black lines around the walls also indicate hard surfaces. So again, if we can absorb some of the sound and we can start to eliminate or slow down the sound energy, we can eliminate echo. Every interaction or bounce costs a little bit of energy. That's why the volume is reduced a little bit, and it also gets a little bit quieter. The classic example is standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon, right? And you yell, hello, and it comes back, hello, 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 and fades off. Your voice energy is bouncing off of different walls and canyons, maybe multiple times before it gets back to your ears, again, at a different volume and at a different time. All right. I love this graphic because it helps demonstrate something that I tried to do in the other slide regarding soft surfaces and energy. If you take a basketball and you bounce it off of an asphalt floor or hardwood, it comes back up to your hand with about the same amount of energy, right? If you grew up poor like I did and you end up playing basketball in the grass or the dirt, you know that you got to put a little more oomph into that basketball to have it come back up to your hand. Take that same basketball and bounce it off a couch cushion or a pillow, and you'll be lucky to get that ball to come up at all. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is that the softer the surface, the more energy is being absorbed, right? So whether it's a basketball or my voice, the principles are exactly the same. Let's understand what happens when we get into a soft surface, or in this case, an acoustic panel. What's really going on? I'm going to reintroduce my bagel buddy, Al, and this is where we put his theory to work. And basically what's happening is the sound energy interacts with these acoustic panels, and the fibers inside of those panels start to vibrate. They start to rub up against each other. And just like all of us on a cold morning when we rub our hands together, the result is heat. This heat then is dissipated throughout the entire panel, which helps explain why some materials, fiberglass, PET, polyester, make better acoustic panels than, let's say, wool or wood or fiberglass. It also helps to explain why thicker panels or larger panels typically end up with a higher NRC rating than thinner or smaller ones, because that heat then is more effectively irradiated away from the source. So basically, this is how acoustic panels work. Contrary to popular belief, not little Keebler elves in there off duty eating sound up. We're basically using Al's theory of convergent energy to transfer that energy, that sound energy, into motion, into heat, and then dissipated. All right. First pop quiz. Didn't know there'd be a quiz, did you? First pop quiz. When we talk absorbing sound or absorption, and the issue is echo or reverb in a space, what measurement are we using? I can hear you all out there. NRC, that's correct. When we talk about blocking sound, preventing transmission of sound from one space to another, we're using which measurement? You're right, STC. Now, I'm being a little jocular here, or attempting to, but these are two important things that we need to have a good grasp on when we start to interact with clients that have got a sound issue. Is it an echo or an absorption, or is it a blocking or an STC issue going forward? All right, class is almost over. We're going to take some of this theory now and we're going to put it into practice. Now, this is a hierarchy of looking for solutions, and it also is one when we look for problems. The first place is carpeting. Does the floor have carpeting at all? Is it a hardwood floor? Is it a cement floor? Is it those ungodly raised cement tiles that we've done projects on in the past? The second place is ceiling. Is there a drop ceiling? Is there no ceiling at all? How high is that ceiling? Is that ceiling, is it wood or is it metal? How much HVAC equipment and ducting is going through it? That's the second place to look. The third would be the walls. You know, in the old days, almost everything was drywall, but now it's glass and brick and cement, or no walls at all. And the lastly is furniture. Like a lot of you, I'm old enough to remember 82-inch high panels where furniture used to be used as an acoustic solution. Not anymore. Although I've started to see those being reintroduced around the country a little bit. So as we go into a solution, and we've gone through our Michael Jackson rendition, A, B, C, the second thing we need to do now is look for sources of problems and also areas for solutions: floors, ceilings, walls, and furniture. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time in the flooring business. There's a lot of you out there that have, but you know that there are some floor covering materials that have higher acoustic properties than others, whether they're the carpeting tiles, whether they're linoleum, hardwood. The floor issue is a great and first step to look for a source of problems and also suggest some solutions. Ceilings. Almost in all the older commercial spaces, we had drop ceilings. It's kind of what you did in a commercial space to hide all that stuff up above. Now, a lot of those ceilings have been eliminated, either partially or totally. And those ceilings that are left typically have the old Armstrong tiles in it. And those NRC ratings have moved down from the 0.7, 0.75 to the 0.5, 0.55, which, as you'll recognize, is not very high on that scale from 0 to 1.0. And the reason for that, quite frankly, is that they had to take some mass and some cost out of it because they weren't doing many ceilings to start with. So when we take a look at ceiling opportunities for solutions, and we'll talk about this in a bit, we can basically double the acoustic effectiveness of a ceiling simply by replacing the tiles with a higher rated NRC material, also hang materials from them. Walls, oftentimes one of the easiest and quickest ways we look for solutions, whether they be sound transmission from one to the other or an echoey environment to apply acoustic tiles to. One, it's a very easy area to install. Two, it's an area that most of us all can recognize that very quickly, more than ceilings. And the last is we can do some really great aesthetics with some of the wall coverings and devices that are available out there. I love the lower right area. It's a conference room out in the Northwest for Trident Seafoods, and they basically hung fish shaped acoustic tiles in one of their conference rooms to help with the echo. And lastly is furniture. There has been so many advances in furniture over the last 4 or 5 years, dating back to pre-COVID. The phone booths, the higher cubicles, cube settings for furniture, adding back screens and those devices to help break down some of the big, giant, wide open spaces where sound really had no place to go and die. So again, furniture is a great viable source to introduce some acoustic solutions. When we get to talk about all of these, we really are talking about application and aesthetics. Where can we put some of our acoustic material? And what do we want it to look like? Whether we're in the open plan, we can ceiling suspend it, freestand it, put it on walls, certainly, introduce it to furniture, that old hierarchy again. Same thing in common areas. Most of us know and recognize as we go through a lot of these common areas, small little conference and huddle rooms are being built off of these, adjacent to these business lobbies or cafeterias for vendor meetings, interviews, and the like. And more attention now is being spent in those spaces than perhaps in days past. Conference rooms, by far and away, the largest area that we get called in time and again. Because of the advent of all of our Zooms and our team meetings, we're getting very comfortable with video conferencing, which, pre-COVID really took a little bit of technical genius to pull it off well, with all the Polycom gear, et cetera. So again, conference rooms now much more finicky and dependent on good acoustics to have an environment where video conferencing works really, really well. Learning environments. It's interesting to note that the NEA, the National Education Association, has standards on classroom acoustics. And I've worked in a number of public school environments. They want to achieve it, but they just typically don't have funds to accomplish it. So I found most of my education and learning environment work in private K through 12 and at the university level. But again, keep in mind that the NEA has got classroom standards published for acoustics. Healthcare, Again, another one of these areas that you're darned if you do and darned if you don't. When we look at healthcare environments, we're really divided into two spaces, carpet and tile. The carpet is we handle just like any other business environment, and it's typically not where you're going to have patient areas, which is on tile. People bleed and you get body fluids and all the rest of it. Oftentimes we're asked in the tile area or in the patient areas for acoustic treatments. Lots of studies indicated that the quieter the environment, the lower the stress and anxiety, the quicker the healing, and the faster people get out of those places. I'm also asked all the time, are your materials porous? In other words, if somebody has a bleeding elbow and they lean up against it, will that blood then transfer or perhaps get into the acoustic panels? Well, yeah. In order for it to be an acoustic panel, it needs to be porous, right? Go back to our Bagel Buddies example. But it's nice to know that there are some materials out there, PET most notably, that are antimicrobial by nature, anti-electronic or anti-static, so it repels dust, and they're cleanable with a 10% bleach. So if you get into a healthcare environment and they're asking you to introduce some acoustic properties into patient areas, look at PET solutions. And lastly, restaurants and hospitality. More and more, almost all of us, right, have been in restaurants where the food's nice, but the area is so noisy, it's so loud that you can't hear what the heck's going on. Even companies like Starbucks, we've been worked with a little bit in the past, or I have in the past, because they recognize that their stores now are so loud that people can't go there to have meetings. Now, they don't want to create environments that attract, homeless people all day long, hanging out by the fireplace. But they also now have more competition than ever before with Caribou and Pete's and local coffee. They want to create magnet stores. They want to create comfortable areas for people to say, hey, let's meet at Starbucks and talk about that proposal. So again, I will encourage you to take a look at restaurants, gathering places, and hospitality areas as a very viable source for acoustic treatments. All right, so let's now talk about crafting solutions. We got all this knowledge, and we really want to put it into play. When you hire, or when your clients hire an acoustician, they're going to bring in this R2D2 piece of equipment. And if any of us have ever set up a home theater in our homes, we know that there's a sound generated and bing, 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 and it's measuring how well that sound either does or doesn't return to the speakers. And that acoustician is going to use his handheld device, and he's going to produce a report that says, yep, you got a problem. Now, I've worked with an awful lot of these from coast to coast, and there are very few of them that can recommend solutions. There are those that do, but very few of them recommend a solution to an echo or to a sound transmission issue. And just know that this is what you're going to get when you contact these folks for about $3,000 to $5,000 per session. When we're talking about providing and addressing acoustic comfort, we're going to go through these three major steps. The very first one is determining what the heck the sound issue is. Is it sound migrating from one space to the other? I get called into that quite a bit. I'm hearing conversations from one private office to the other, or this huge legal firm that's got their boardroom set off the lobby, right? And you can hear everything that's going on in there. Not cool. So I'm asked to be addressed that. Sound echo within a space. Recently, we did a large project here for Getty Images. They just had about 20 or so conference rooms built out of 4 glass partitions, modular walls. I think they used dirt, and they were all so echoey. They were all so bad that they really were uninhabitable. So we talked about addressing that and started to provide some solutions. And last is spaces that are so quiet, you can hear a pin drop from across the room. And that's a good candidate for white noise. It's interesting to note here, I can't tell you how many times a phone call has come into me and sounds something like this. Hi, I'm a lawyer and I have very confidential conversations in my office and I need some white noise in my office. We're now starting to realize that that's wrong on a couple of different fronts. But the very first step in addressing acoustic comfort is determining what the sound challenge is. The second one is craft a solution. We're going to talk a little bit about crafting solutions, whether we need to improve the barriers, place barriers to start with, introduce some absorbing material, or introduce some white noise. And the third, obviously, is follow up after the fact. Did we resolve the problem that you were having? All right. So let's talk about echo or reverb. You didn't know there'd be any math on this session, right? Well, this is an internet-based formula for determining how much highly rated acoustic material needs to be in the space in order to achieve the RT, remember those three characters, the ISO, the ASTM, the well building, the RT levels that they have specified. Don't like math? I don't blame you. I don't either. So we've created an easier way to do that. And that's basically on our website. This isn't a paid political announcement, but I love quicker, easier ways to do things, and we've done that for you. So go to our website at mergeworks.com, and in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see an acoustic calculator. I wanted to call it the easy button, but somebody's already using that. And what that easy button is going to ask you to do, it's going to do a calculation for you. It's going to ask you for these dimensions: room width, length, and ceiling height. We're also going to give you the opportunity to pick the type of the space. Remember, RTs are for different space: private office, conference rooms, restaurants, gymnasiums, those type of things. And you're going to hit the magic calculate button. And as a result, you're going to get the amount of material highly rated, which is a 0.7 or higher, the amount of material you need in that space to achieve the RT levels that are specified in the international standards. In this particular case, we need between 65 and 83 square feet of material. Well, why did you give me a range, Darrell? Why isn't it more specific? We gave you a range so that you didn't have to do all the calculations that you do with some of the internet-based formulas. In other words, we've tried to take into account whether there's carpet on the floor or not, an ACT, a drop ceiling, what some of the wall materials are. We gave you a range. Now, if you walk into a space and you see that there's carpeting and a drop ceiling, you may be able to get away with something lower on the lower range of the recommendation. If, however, you walk into the space, there's hardwood floors, glass walls, no ceiling, then you're probably should be leaning towards the upper end, in this case, 83. The other thing that we did, and we did this primarily for our dealer audience, but anybody can use it, is created this budgeting tool. Oftentimes people say, well, okay, how much are things going to cost? And you can see that since you're on our website already, you're going to be given a hot link to all the specific of each one of these products. And so in this case, you're going to need 9 of these, or 12 of those, or 6 of these, or 3 of these, etc. So our Echo wall tiles are our most economic solution. Each one of those is about $850 in round terms. If I know I need 6 of those, basically I can do the calculation in front of the client, and I've done this on my phone many times. 6 times 8 is what, about $5,000 in speed math, $6,000 list. Oh, okay. So now we can start to give not only a recommended solution, but we can also start to give some rudiments of a budget. That's the reason that this was done for you. And again, anybody can get on our website and do these calculations. Or you can take the recommended square footage that you need and apply it to any product that you are in favor of working on. And you know how to create the amount of square footage that's given to you, whether it's a simple wall panel or a hanging baffle or wall tiles, and then calculate that. And again, the only caveat really here is that the product have an NRC rating of 0.7 or higher. And yep, you can use our calculator with anyone else's product, although we'd sort of like you to use it with ours. Here's something else that is important to keep in mind. A lot of studies have been done. The most recent one was by an Italian firm, indicating that it's not as important where you put the product as it is to have the right amount of product in the space. Again, let me say that again. It's more important to have the right amount of material in the space than where basically you put it. Now, I know that the NCIDQ manual certainly gives a preference starting with the ceiling and then the walls. And we're not in conflict with their recommendations or their testing standards. We're basically saying that it's not as important where you put the product as it is having the right amount in the space. Some of the applications that you can have fun with, and again, once you determine how much, really limitations become application and aesthetics, and the aesthetics really are only limited by your own creativity. So whether they're freestanding, they're wall mounted, they're ceiling suspended, again, lots and lots of solutions that are available for you out there. MergeWorks also enjoys doing a lot of custom stuff. So if you're trying to differentiate your proposal from someone else's, or create and craft a solution that is really more ingenious, as well as being very acoustically oriented, here are some samples to do this, whether they be logos or we're San Antonio, Texas based, so we like all this cowboy stuff. Again, the only limitations are your own creativity. All right. So here's some common questions as we start to move to the end of this thing. Does thickness matter? Yep, it does. Remember our bagel buddy Al's theory of converting sound energy to heat and dissipating it. Typically, the thicker the material, the higher the NRC. And also another rule of thumb is the higher the NRC, typically the less of it that you need, which translates into a budget. Do holes matter? You saw a number of our products examples having holes in them. Yeah, it does, because it lowers the effectiveness of that material to radiate the heat. Oftentimes what we'll recommend is, if you do some nice designs and some holes, that you put it with a backer on there. Not only will it reestablish the original NRC ratings, typically it'll raise it a little bit because it's thicker. Displacement matter? Nope, we just talked about that. It's more important to have the right amount in the space than it is where you put the stuff. There are other formulas available. There's 2 or 3 other formulas that I used to use in prior lives before my life was made simpler by the acoustic calculator button on the MergeWorks website. Just know that they're out there. So if you run into somebody who says, well, my calculations say, that's where they're getting that. Now, it's also nice to note that I've tested our easy button or our acoustic calculator against the other 3 that I had primarily used in prior lives, and we're plus or minus 10%. So since speed kills, and it all talks into how quickly we can come up with things, plus or minus 10% will get you where you need to go, particularly to begin with. Can desk dividers be used as acoustic treatments? Yeah, absolutely. Again, doesn't matter where you put it, so long as you have the right amount of highly rated acoustic material in the space. And the last one I thought I'd share with you is what we call the clap test. And it basically is pretty simple as this. You walk into a space and clap real loud. And by doing that, you'll hear the resonance or the echo or reverb in the space. And once you've done a number of these, your ears will become trained very quickly to recognize the level of reverb in the space. And again, we use the clap test not only to determine for ourselves, but certainly to demonstrate to our clients how much echo and reverb is in there. Now, I'm not going to play this for you on the essence of time, but if you go to our website under resources down in videos, we did a before and after video for you. And I can share with you, since it was me in front of the camera, there were no shenanigans done. I didn't modulate my voice. We basically took this space, which is, linoleum floor, hardwoods, and a drop ceiling. We ran through our acoustic calculator and put the right amount of material in it. And basically, it's a 2-minute video. It shows you the before and after. It's very effective. It starts to train your ear. And it's also something I'd recommend that you share with your clients. Again, we're not going to spend any time on that right now. This is my appeal to the design community. Proper acoustics generates high performance workspaces. Again, the proper acoustics yield high performance workspaces, which we're all basically in our business being paid to produce. And my appeal to you is, don't let this be value engineered out. Don't let some of the acoustic material that you have placed and designed into the space be eliminated. Because I'll also share with you that I've been doing some serious commercial acoustics for the last 10 to 12 years. 80 to 90% of my calls are post-occupancy. People have moved into their space, and I get the call that people can't live in it. In the case of Getty Images in their conference rooms. Beautiful space, but they were unusable. So again, this is my appeal to the design community. Please don't VE out acoustic material. Okay, so you've suffered through this long enough. Let me share with you how you get credit for this course. This is the material, the information that I need. I need your name, your membership number, your IIDA or your IDCEC, however they designated that, your email and your phone number, and email that information to me, Darrell, at MergeWorks.com. And I have 5 days to get the whole list together and submit it for your credit. Now, the other part too is if you want a certificate for listening in on this, me making your ears and eyes bleed, just simply indicate that on your form. If you want a hard copy, give me your mailing address. If you don't want a hard copy or you want to produce a hard copy on your end, I'll email this to you. And this is basically the way that it looks. Even my buddy Chris took the class to understand North Pole acoustics a little bit better.